Good morning, beautiful people across Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean, wherever you may be viewing from. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Today is another beautiful Wednesday in Scarborough, Tobago, and we are here on Book Club Corner. My name is Jewel Green, and as usual, we're interviewing stakeholders of the publishing industry, authors and publishers, and we bring to you the authors, the information and the insights about publishing and about the literary arts and about your love for the literary arts. And today we have with us three special guests, and this special webinar called Pages and Protection is going to be in commemoration of Caribbean Literature Day. And we have with us today we have three awesome guests, and they are Mr. Nicholas Lushu, Lyrinda, Persaud, and of course Miss Katie Webb. And we are so happy to have you all here with us. Of course, we're going to show and tell the visitors all about you. Mr. Lushu, he has many accolades, and if they could bring up those accolades to jog my memory, because let me tell you, these are smart people. Mr. Lushu is the Vice President of the Trinidad and the Tobago Reprographic Rights Organization. He's also the Director of CARUSA, and he'll be talking about CARUSA today. He is the Intellectual Property Specialist at Exius IA, and he's the former CEO of COT. And those, of course, are just some of the things that Mr. Lushu has done and is about. And he's going to be addressing the issue of reproduction rights and intellectual property and copyright in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, when we see reproduction rights, we think, oh, we're talking about having children. And no, we're not talking about that. We're talking about reproducing people's work. And Mr. Lushu is going to get into that today. The next panelist we are going to be having with us today is Miss Lyrinda Persaud. Miss Lyrinda Persaud is the legal officer too of the Intellectual Property Office right here in Trinidad and Tobago. She has a Bachelor of Science in Laws, and she holds a Master in the Business Administration in Leadership, Entrepreneurship and Innovation. She also holds a certificate in legal education, and she is going to be addressing the national landscape of intellectual property rights and copyrights in Trinidad and Tobago as well. And our final but not least guest is Miss Katie Webb, and she is the International Co-Director of the Italian Writers Union. She's also the coordinator of the Latin America and Caribbean Network for the International Authors Forum, and the Tobago Writers Guild is a member of the International Authors Forum that happened earlier this year. And she is also the former administrator for IAF, and she holds a Master's in Literature, a diploma in copyright law, and she's working on her biography as well. And she's going to be looking at authors' copyright and compensation on the international landscape. We're so happy to have our three guests with us today, and without any further ado, because this is we're really wanting to commemorate Caribbean Literature Day, right, and celebrate the authors, but there is the business side of it, right? It's not just the song and dance of writing and marketing, selling your book. just like there's the business side of music, there's the business side of writing, and we're going to be getting into that today. This is something that a lot of authors don't really want to get into, right? It may seem dry and boring, there's no character development and imagination, but let me tell you, this is going to ensure that when you sell your work, when you produce your work, that you are compensated and that you are protected. Without any further ado, we are going to call on Miss Lyrinda Persaud. Lyrinda, are you there with us?
Can you hear me?
Fantastic. I'm seeing you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So, before you go into your presentation, or should I just say go ahead and do the presentation? Because I just want people to know what the IPO stands for and what it does. If it's included in a presentation, by all means, don't let me derail you.
That's fine. Well, first of all, on behalf of the controller of the Trinidad and Tobago Property Office, Mr. Regan Asgarali, Senior Counsel, and the executive staff of the TTIPO, I would like to express sincere gratitude for the ability to share some IP awareness with you all this morning. The Intellectual Property Office is responsible for the granting, education, and registration of intellectual property rights. We are a division of the Office of the Attorney General and Ministry of Legal Affairs. So, having shared some background into the work of the TTIPO, I would like to get started into the presentation. I believe you all are sharing screen. Thank you very much. So we can skip to the next couple slides. You can go on to slide 3. So this is a brief overview of the presentation, and the first thing I would like to do is to define intellectual property. Intellectual property seems to be something that is so inclusive, and it is really the expressed creations of the mind. In the interest of time, I will not share the story of Naruto, but I have included the link below for you all to get a little idea as to why it is the express creations of the human mind. But to summarize, the quote in this matter essentially held that copyright is not monkey's business. Next slide, please. I like to think of intellectual property as a Venn diagram with subsets, and copyright and neighboring rights are one of the subsets of that aspect of intellectual property. Next slide, please. Copyright, as the name suggests, is the right to copy. It is the right of the author or the creator of a work copying of their work by third parties. The controller taught me copyright in the form or acronym of an old man. O for original, L for literary, D for dramatic, M for musical, A for artistic, and N for neighboring works. The governing law would be the Copyright Act of Trinidad and Tobago, Chapter 8280, as amended by Act Number 14 of 2020. Next slide, please. As authors, it is important for you to know how to protect your work. And importantly, in our jurisdiction, there are no formal requirements. There are no registration requirements. What does that mean? Your work is protected upon creation. However, there are some ways in which you can assert your ownership. One of those would be through the copyright legend, where you put the C in the circle, your name, and the year with the words all rights reserved. Another method of protection is through statutory declaration, where you go before a commissioner of affidavits and you attach a copy of your work to that affidavit, and you basically attest to the fact that you are the creator of the work and you indicate the date of creation. The third means is through poor man's copyright, where you send via registered post a copy of the work to yourself without opening it. It must remain sealed. Next slide, please. In the interest of time, I will not go through this suite of provisions. However, I have highlighted for your ease of reference some of the key components and provisions of the law. In terms of duration of copyright, copyright vests in the work from upon creations, which is the life of the author, plus 50 years after death. In terms of ownership, the author-creator is the owner of the work. However, where work is created during the course of employment, it belongs to the employer. Next slide, please. As with everything, there are certain exceptions, and there are exceptions under the Copyright Act for fair use or fair dealing, such as quotations and news reporting. In terms of moral rights, the author-creator of a work has the right to be identified as the author of the work. In terms of economic rights, only the owner of the work has the exclusive rights to do, authorize, and prohibit certain things such as communication to the public, adaptation of the work, reproduction, and distribution of the work. Next slide, please. Copyright infringement occurs where, for example, someone uploads your work without your permission, distributes copies of your works without your permission, or plagiarizes your work. Next slide, please. There are remedies for infringement as set out in our legislation, and I have included some here for your ease of reference. Next slide, please. One of the topics I was asked to talk about is what can authors do when they have to negotiate contracts. I have included a reference here to the World Intellectual Property Organization's Toolkit for Contracts in Publishing, which is a guide for authors and publishers. One of the things that this toolkit does is it sets out certain requirements which must be met in contracts. In the United Kingdom, for example, they have adopted the acronym CREATOR, which is adhered to when contracts are being negotiated. Next slide, please. So you have C in terms of the contract itself. It must be clear and specify the scope of the rights of both parties. R, it must ensure that there is equitable remuneration for the exploitation of works. Next slide, please. E, they must recognize the exploitation of the works, and this is one of the elements that we would have spoken about earlier. It's the exclusive right of an author-creator to exploit their works in any form or fashion. A, there must be a fair and proper understanding of accountability. T, the term of the contract must be negotiated as well as the terms of the contractual agreement. O, for ownership, we would have spoken briefly about ownership earlier on. And R, the terms of the must. Next slide, please. I was also asked to introduce you all to some of the key conventions and international treaties which Trinidad and Tobago is a member of and how they have helped us. So Trinidad and Tobago is a member of the Berne Convention for the Protection of Literary and Artistic Works. This basically means that works are protected upon creation. There is no registration requirement, and we adhere to a certain three-step test regarding limitations and exceptions under copyright. In our jurisdiction, the exceptions are identified at sections 9 to 17 of the Copyright Act and will include the examples I would have alluded to earlier, such as news reporting and quotations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Another convention which Trinidad and Tobago is a member of, or another treaty rather, is the WIPO Copyright Treaty, which deals with the protection of works and the rights of authors in the digital environment. And it basically looks at certain rights such as the rights of rental and distribution, among others. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Of equal importance is our accession to the Marrakesh Treaty, which introduces the ability of authorized entities to convert works into accessible formats for persons who are blind, visually impaired, or otherwise print disabled. In Trinidad and Tobago, our authorized entity is NALIS, and they have been recognized as the entity to engage in the conversion of such books. This facilitates inclusiveness and participation in our cultural and entertainment lives. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I have included a brief overview and overlook of artificial intelligence in the intellectual property landscape. And overall, or generally, the jurisprudence continues to evolve, but the position currently is that the author-creator work is one who is identified as a human. So with this brief presentation and introduction to intellectual property, I hope that I have addressed the issues that I was asked to, and I hand over to the host. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lyrinda. Listen, you covered quite a bit, and I really loved, for me, that Marrakesh Treaty, I think is extremely important in an environment where we want to engage all members of society and we want to promote inclusiveness. I think this Marrakesh Treaty was very pivotal in increasing inclusivity across the board. And the fact that NALIS, right, is the one tasked with making sure that documents are converted, whether they're for the blind, or the visually impaired, or the hearing impaired. I think that's very important. Thank you very much for that presentation. We're going to be coming back to you because I have some questions here. Thank you very much for that. That was Lyrinda Persaud of the Intellectual Property Office of Trinidad and Tobago. The next panelist, we will be having Mr. Nicholas Luchu, and he is the Vice President of the Trinidad and Tobago Reprographic Rights Organization. Mr. Luchu, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
And without any further ado, Mr. Luchu, take it away.
Good morning, members of the Tobago Writers Guild, fellow panelists, and the audience. Let me build on the good foundation that Lyrinda has just set. And I will start with talking about what a collective management organization is. A collective management organization is an organization owned by its members. Those members assign or license their rights in their works to it, and in exchange, it, the CMO, licenses use of those works to third parties and then distributes the income to its members as it is used. Sounds like a mouthful, but it's really relatively simple. Now, CMOs, and I talk about CMOs because there are different types of CMOs. There are CMOs that represent writers and authors and publishers of written works, graphic art, art itself, the visual art, photographers. That is what the Trinidad and Tobago Reprographic Rights Organization is, and CAROSA by extension, but I'll get to that later. And how they work, all of them work, is they have license tariffs. These are what we license, these are how we license, these are how the license fees are calculated. They have distribution policies that says this is how the funds that are collected is distributed and how the people it is to be distributed to as royalties are paid, the exact calculations. Those are the two bedrock: the membership agreement, the tariff agreement, and the distribution policy are the three most important documents for the operation of a CMO. So let's take TTRRO now. TTRRO was formed in 2004 to represent writers of printed works, photographers, artists, visual artists, graphic artists, for the rights of reproduction, communication to the public, and in some cases adaptation, but those are the exceptions. So, what is communication to the public? A layman definition of communication to the public is when third party, anybody, any individual, can access copyright works at any time and from any place they choose, which is, of course, the internet. Now, reprographic rights organizations in the early days formed what is known as the International Federation of Reprographic Right Organizations. That organizations basically set the standard for what distribution policies should contain, how tariffs should be constructed, and how you conduct your business with third parties. What it also did was to provide a network of RROs all around the world with the understanding in writing that if, for instance, in Trinidad and Tobago, TTRO licenses a work that belongs to CLA in the UK, we license on their behalf, collect usage data, and remit those two pieces of important pieces back to CLA. And likewise, they do the same thing for us in their territory. And that provides a network. So recognize RROs like TTRRO have agreements with all the other major CMOs, RROs around the world to do just that. They collect on our behalf in their territory, we collect on their behalf in our territory. Now, CAROSA. CAROSA was born out of the need to license regional entities on a regional basis. So like I implied before, RROs have jurisdiction in normally national in countries. So TTRO for Trinidad and Tobago, BCAP in Barbados, Jam Copy in Jamaica. CAROSA was created because we recognized that there were entities in the Caribbean that were Caribbean-based, regional. They had branches throughout the Caribbean, and therefore they needed to be licensed on a Caribbean regional-wide basis. And that is why CAROSA exists as a facilitator of licenses. So RROs in the Caribbean will license CAROSA to license regional entities on everyone's behalf. Now, there's much that can be spoken about as regards CMOs. But let me tell you some of the bases for how CMOs operate. So the CMOs will license their works, and it could be music, it could be written works, because you have CMOs that represent all of those. CUT represents music, both the composers and authors of music, and the performers and producers of recordings. TTRO represents printed works, online use, and photocopying, physical copying. There are organizations around the world, in other countries, that do other things. For example, designers. There are an organization of designers in the UK that represents designers and directors of audiovisual works. So it really depends on how many members you can pull together to form an organization and how many works could form the repertoire of that organization. The more, the merrier. That's the golden rule. Now, a little bit of history behind TTRO. It was formed in 2004. And I remember I was around when it was formed. Not as a director of TTRO then, but I was at the IPO in those days. And it took about 2 years before it started operating. And it has been operating since then. Now, as you may recognize, enforcing and licensing copyright works in Trinidad and Tobago is not as easy as in some other territories around the world. So it has been rough going to license in Trinidad. But we have license, and there's still more work to do. Now, let me go on to AI. Now I will talk about 3 areas in which AI impacts copyright and vice versa. Now, for those who know how AIs are designed and operated, one of the first phases in the process of launching an AI and developing an AI is to train the software to use information. That information is unfortunately copyright work owned by other people who have nothing to do with the developers. So all around the world, there have been a slew of copyright infringement cases based on unauthorized use of copyright works. Most are still before the courts, but a normal reading of the Copyright Act says, or only the owner of copyright shall have the right to do, authorize, or prohibit the reproduction of a work, the communication to the public of the work, and an adaptation of the work. So therefore, by reason, if it wasn't the owner using the works, then, and it didn't have permission, well, they should be infringing. But we'll leave that for the courts to decide. So that's one issue. Another issue is when you prompt any AI model to produce something, who owns it? I didn't say who is the creator. Only the owner could be only the human could be a creator. Lyrinda made that very clear. But who owns the work? Now, that's a question I will look forward to the courts deciding sooner rather than later. Another question, and this came up with the Screenwriters Guild strikes late last year, early this year, was the use of AI on audiovisual works using actors' performances and modifying them. There's a great concern in that industry that movie houses will use AI to do that, even though the works of the actors are performances under the copyright acts around the world. That is also another area that requires some airing out. Now, this is a short presentation, and I look forward now to the questions that probably will come. Thank you.
Issue. Listen, there's so much there's so much in there, but I just want to bring to the viewers the pertinent fact of this. What cut is to musicians and composers, TTRRO is to the literary industry, to the writers, okay, to publishers. So once you understand that, because cut, everybody knows cut. Oh, cut is for music. Well, the literary industry has their own, and the TTRO is that. Thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. Lishu. I have some notes. We'll be coming back to you with a lot of questions for you, Lyrinda, and this last presenter who is coming. But before we get into this last presentation and into our questions, we're going on a quick break. There's so much more information to come and so much more rich sharing happening later. I want you to go and get some snacks, get a drink, get comfortable. Don't go far. We'll be right back. This is Book Club Corner, Pages and Protection, Special Edition. See you in a few minutes. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, across the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago, wherever you may be viewing. Welcome back to Book Club Corner. Today we have a special edition. We're doing a webinar called Pages and Protection, and this is in collaboration with the Tobago Writers Guild as well as the Tobago Library Services. And what we're addressing here today is contracts, compensation, and copyright for authors in an AI world. So far, we have had Mr. Lushu of the Trinidad and Tobago Reprographic Rights Organization. We have had Ms. Lyrinda Persaud from the Intellectual Property Office of Trinidad and Tobago. And our last presenter, by no means least, is Ms. Katie Webb of the International Authors Forum. Welcome, Katie. I believe your mic is off.
Excuse me. Hello. And
Hi.
thank you, Jewel, for the invitation to participate in today's webinar. May I ask for my presentation? Thank you very much. Okay, next slide, please. My name is Katie Webb, and together with Maria Fernanda Mendoza from Mexico, I coordinate the Latin America and Caribbean network of the International Authors Forum, which is what I'm here to talk to you about today. But I have worked with the IAF since its beginnings more than 10 years ago. So today I'm going to talk to you about what the International Authors Forum is, how we advocate for and represent authors internationally, and the significance of our work for members, particularly for the Tobago Writers Guild, who is one of our newest members and of which we are very proud. Next slide, please. And finally, I'm also going to address how artificial intelligence is influencing and affecting copyright internationally, which obviously we've heard about from our previous speaker as well. But I will give you the International Authors Forum's perspective and concerns about that. So to start, what is IAF? Well, IAF is a network of 89 member organisations on all continents, representing hundreds of thousands of authors. And we represent authors' organisations in the text and image sectors, including writers, translators, illustrators, audiovisual authors, and visual artists. Anyone, in short, who makes a living from their creative expression, which is protected by a set of rights called copyright, which thankfully our former speakers have explained in great detail and very articulately today. So we were founded in 2013 to help authors all over the world continue to make a living from the use of their work when the forces of globalization and digitization, which present many opportunities for authors to get their works out there through the internet, also come with many threats for authors, such as illegal copying and sharing of their works, the rise of big tech companies, and most recently artificial intelligence, which although can be hugely valuable, also like to use authors' work without asking and tend not to like to pay them, which more often than not violates the principles of copyright and authors' rights systems in place to pay them. Next slide, please. So to give some context for this, the picture for authors today, from studies done around the world, studies haven't been done in all countries, but even in the so-called developed world, from where we do have figures available, we know that authors' incomes are falling, even as the value of the creative industries to which authors' work is essential is growing. For example, in the UK, despite a continued growth in the creative industries valued at £112 billion in 2020, median earnings for professional writers have fallen by 42% in real terms since 2005. That is from £18,013 in 2005 to £10,500 in 2017. This statistic is taken from a report of the All-Party Writers Group, a cross-party government interest group concerning the UK, a relatively wealthy country, but we know from other data and from qualitative evidence in other countries that the situation is the same all over the world, if not worse in many places. So with fewer opportunities to make a living, there will be fewer working authors, and we believe that the world would be a poorer place. So the IAF is here to try and ensure this doesn't happen and ensure authors can work and make a living now and, we hope, always. So our aims encapsulate what we do, and I'll just read them out to you as I haven't got too long today. Next slide, please. And those aims are to advocate the important role of authors in society as the drivers of creativity, cultural diversity, and the economic value they generate. To promote and defend authors' interests and authors' rights, including the economic and moral stakes that allow them to keep creating. To work towards fair publishing contracts with legislation and industry standards that guarantee protection and honest treatment for authors. A fundamental nurturing of authors' rights, particularly promoting remuneration rights and collective management, among other means, that ensure authors receive just and equitable remuneration whenever their works are used. And number 5, to provide authors' organisations worldwide with a platform for knowledge sharing, solidarity and support for each other on shared issues. Next slide, please. So just a few examples of the practical action that we do take. We conduct lobbying and advocacy. We attend meetings of the World Intellectual Property Organization, or WIPO, in Geneva, where we have permanent observer status as an NGO. WIPO is the branch of the United Nations that deals with intellectual property and copyright, and it is made up of around 200 world governments and is where the international intellectual property framework is decided, which then goes on to influence national copyright laws and policies. It is very important for authors to have a voice at WIPO because ultimately it is their rights which are the basis of copyright. And there are many lobbying groups there who are influential, representing conflicting groups such as users, big tech, libraries, educational institutions and publishers. And sometimes we agree with them, but it is so important for authors to be able to talk independently on their own terms. We also have recently started collaborating with UNESCO, both in the region of the Latin America and the Caribbean, through CERLALC, the Center for the Promotion of Reading and Books in the Latin America and the Caribbean, and through the World Book Capital project run by UNESCO. And we support our members in lobbying their national governments too about copyright issues, promoting a strong global copyright framework that protects authors' rights and enables authors to make a living. We also have resources such as the 10 Principles for Fair Contracts. The 10 Principles for Fair Contracts are a resource to be available for authors all over the world in order to redress the balance between authors and publishers, in which publishers are usually the stronger party calling the shots, in order to empower authors about the value of their work and about their legal rights, so that they can agree a contract which will give them fair working conditions, of course with fair remuneration, and helping them to achieve their objectives as authors. We have other information and education resources such as myths about copyright, in order again to enable authors to promote copyright and to inform users about what copyright really is, which is a tool to incentivize creation. It's not to put a wall up against accessing copyright works. Statistics about the realities of earning a living as an author, and interviews and testimonials with authors around the world, and many other resources such as our Principles for AI, which are our most recent output. We also participate in events. We produce our own webinars on topical issues for authors, and we also attend events around the world. We're part of IFRO and CSAC, which the former speaker was talking about, which are the international bodies for collective management organizations. We, of course, go to WIPO, and this photograph that you can see on the bottom left-hand corner is our team at Guadalajara Book Fair in Mexico last year, which we'll be attending again this December. Next slide, please. So what we hope for Caribbean authors in 2024. Technically, Caribbean nations are already included in the Latin America and Caribbean network of the International Authors Forum, but in reality, they are a very small part of it. So we are, for that reason, extremely proud that the Tobago Writers Guild has joined the International Authors Forum this year, hoping that more voice can be given to Caribbean authors. And we hope that they will join our network meetings, which take place specifically for the region 4 times a year. In fact, we have already held 2 with the collaboration of Casey Garvey from the Poetry Association Jaiku in Jamaica, and we have had the pleasure to involve Jewel in those meetings too. We have also organising other events regularly. For example, just last week we held a meeting about the importance of copyright, again to celebrate Caribbean Literature Day, along with Caribbean literary writers from all over the Caribbean, and we had a very successful event about fair contracts specifically in the context of poetry, which was very interesting because it's not usually something that we think about, that it's easy to make a living from poetry, but the discussions we had at that meeting were very, very enlightening and helpful. So we hope that Caribbean authors will also take part in the book fairs we attend, campaigns, and we also have digital file sharing and chat resources through which we can create solidarity and transmit communications. And we hope that we can explore issues which are relevant to Caribbean authors, as we do in general for authors around the world. But we think that collective rights management, such as the work of Carosa, is really important. We also think self-publishing is important in the Caribbean, and of course, artificial intelligence, which impacts authors across borders, as well as fair contracts. So next slide, please. Just finally, to quickly address how artificial intelligence is influencing and affecting authors' copyright worldwide, I direct you to some resources, really informative and long discussions about the artificial intelligence, which are available on IAF's website. There's a full recording of a very interesting webinar with experts from across the world that we had last year, talking about the issues of concerns, and then IAF's own principles for artificial intelligence and authorship, which it also released, and which I'll summarize now. Next slide, please. So how artificial intelligence is influencing and affecting authors' copyright worldwide? Well, I wanted to begin by saying that this is of concern and being specifically addressed by international agencies which affect authors' rights, such as WIPO, UNESCO, and IAF. And you can find more about that through the resources I showed you. The artificial intelligence is for authors and as human creators, and its work is protected. Excuse me, I just have to deal with my child. She's
Listen, This is a prime example of how we balance parenthood, motherhood, fatherhood right inside our work we're doing, even as writers, right? Even as organizational heads. And Katie is our new mom. Congratulations to you, Katie. And we hear the little one in the background. She's not having any of it. She wants mommy's attention right now.
She's okay. Oh, she does.
Right now.
Yes, she likes to learn about copyright, perhaps in small doses.
You can see she's very enthusiastic about WIPO and copyright and all of that. She's making sure, that she gets it in. She's probably going to be one of our experts that we're going to be looking towards later in the... Give her a few years. Yeah. So we're going to be heading... Thank you so much for that, Katie. We're going to be heading towards a Q&A right now. There was so much information shared. I don't want us to miss anything. Those two presentations that were shared, please be comforted that they will be shared with you upon request. All you need to do if you are in the viewing audience and you want to have those presentations to look back on, yes, you can look at this obviously, but you can email us bookclubcornertt@gmail and request them, and we will send them to you so that you can have personal use of them. And of course, please remember, as we are dealing with copyrights, that what we're sending to you is copyrighted material that we're sharing with you, those presentations. I want to get back to Mr. Lushu. We have the question of the orange economy. And when we bring up the orange economy, a lot of persons say, oh Lord, another word, another economy, another type of economy. I hear about the green, I hear about the blue, and now I'm hearing about the orange. My God, what is this?
Creative economy.
Exactly. Just to put it like that, it is the economy that covers anything that is dealing with intellectual. So once you have used your mind to create it, an inventor, a musician, a literary creative, you're making arts and craft, that would include you in the orange economy. But what we're focusing on is the literary arts, right? The literary art industry, that sector of the orange economy. And when we look at it, I'm just going to throw this out there. There's the yellow economy too, right? The yellow economy, go look it up, guys. But the yellow economy really is talking about how we are using the interest and preferences of our users online digitally to sell. So this has to do with Facebook and YouTube, how they're giving you free access to these digital platforms to sell your preferences to big data companies, right? So that is just, we're going to be addressing that. Just a little plug for that yellow economy, because we're using all the colors of the rainbow, right? So when we look at TTRRO belongs to Trinidad and Tobago to cover authors, the literary print industry in terms of our rights. Mr. Lushu, you said the word license, right? You said the word management agreement. You used distribution policy. What I want to know from you, because, when you're thinking about it, you always want to, what do you mean license? Like, I could get a license, me, the writer, I could get a license for my work. Could you explain in the context of the literary sector, what exactly do you mean by this license, the distribution policy, and membership agreement?
Okay. The way members own the CMO is through their membership agreements. Generally, membership agreements say, in exchange for me licensing and authorizing you to license my works for me while I'm a member, you, the organizations, the CMO, will license the use of my works and everybody's works in the organization to third parties. That's what that means. That's as simple as that means. Now, in practice, CMOs don't license the works of their members to individual members because it's owned by them. So all the member has to do, and this is particularly so with music, is to inform CMO, DCMO, whichever it may be, that look, I am using the music in my own event that I am organizing. And normally, the CMO will not license. In other words, licensing is charging you for use of the works in that use, for that use that you want to put it to. That's what a license is. It's a written agreement, or it ought to be a written agreement.
What we're hearing is the CMO, who is TTRRO in Trinidad and Tobago. We are the literary creatives, we write work, authors, publishers. We come to you and become a member. So there's a social contract between the TTRRO and its members. For
There's
the
a written
TTRRO, right, for you all to represent our work,
yes.
different territories. So there is, and I came to know this through a meeting I attended. There's also the Jamaican reproductive rights. So there's Jam Copy. There's there's one in Trinidad and Tobago. There's Jamaica. I believe there's Barbados. Yes. So the Caribbean itself, each island has their own reproductive or reprographic rights organization, and they all now are coming together to get on this platform called Carusa. Am I right?
They're all members of Carusa. Each have directors on board of Carusa.
Tell us
They
about
all
Carusa and what does that word mean? What does Carusa stand for?
Caribbean Reprographic Rights Organizations Agency.
And all of these different island reprographic rights organizations are now forming Carusa, which is a regional body.
Yes.
Through that
No.
regional body, we can be licensed in other international territories as well as in our own and cross countries, yes?
Carusa licenses organizations that have a regional presence. So they are present across multiple islands in the Caribbean. So that their requirements will be not just individual licenses from each one of us, but they will want to have a license for the whole of the Caribbean region from everybody. And Carusa represents the individual islands RROs in that license agreement. So key,
And this,
you must be regional in nature.
Yes. So last question for you at this time, because I have some more here. When we look at licensing, and for instance, you're having a literary event, right? We're charging money, we're having a literary event, we're having a book fair, or, one of those events where we'll be sharing information from other writers as well as ourselves, right? This is something we call up TTRRO, ring, and we say, Mr. Lushu, we're having X, Y, and Z event, and we need a license. Is that right?
Not for that, not for literary works. If it was music, yes, but not for literary works. Because an exhibition is one of those rights that is administered by the writer themselves. So once the writer is part of an exhibition, it is understood that they authorize the exhibition to exhibit the works. There's no license. Where TTR will come in is on two fronts, two big fronts. Well, both of them used to be big. Now one is rather large. Physical copies and online copying. Now you may think, well, online copying is just, somebody make a copy of a work and it's online, it's available on a server. No. The way our law is written, any portion of a work that is copied, that is not copied by the owner of the work, requires the authorization of the owner of the work, a license. Now, let me give you some good examples. You remember the good old days when they had a lot of photocopy places around? Right? They required licenses. They didn't all have licenses. And I'm being generous when I say that. There are less of them around, but they still require licenses. And the licenses wouldn't authorize them to copy 100% of a book. The license is very specific. It allows you to capture a maximum amount of the book or work. If you want the whole work, buy the book.
Mr. Lishu, I'm feeling attacked. I'm feeling attacked. Let me tell you, I'm selling out myself here and nobody else, right? As a university student, I did a summer school in UWI St. Augustine, right? I was at Cave Hill. And I tell people this all the time. I said, in those days, you would take as a matter of fact, you would go down to the photocopy center and there were a million of them around UWI at the time. And you would just tell them the name of the book. They'll say, yeah, come back tomorrow, so-and-so time, give you a chit, go and pay this because they all would be copying these books, right?
Yeah.
And as a student, you don't have any money. You're so grateful for the little, fraction of the cost. But that was copyright infringement. And let me tell you, I never thought of it. I took the book, enjoyed my class, and that was it. And these are some of the things we're talking about. Mr. Lishu, let me tell you, and all those out there who still copy any people textbooks, stop it. Okay? We're here to tell you there's a better way that the writer can be recompensed. You will still get use of it. There's a better way. Let's do it the right way. We're going on another quick break, but when we come back, we will be doing another Q&A. I have some questions for Miss Lyrinda and for Miss Katie Webb, IPO office and the International Authors Forum. Please don't go far. We have some very, very useful information coming here for you. Next few minutes, we will see you. We'll be back very shortly. We're back. Thank you so much for sticking with us right here on Book Club Corner. And we're having quite a session here today. Pages on Protection, a special edition dealing with copyrights, contracts, and compensations for authors in an AI world. I have a question for... We're back. Thank you so much for us right here on Book Club Corner. And we're... Listen, these things happen. So we have a question for Lyrinda. Lyrinda, you're from the IPO office, and the question a lot of authors ask, and people around the world when we talk about protections, when we have these issues being dealt with in terms of saying this is what should happen, that is what should happen, can you answer for us? How do we? What are the teeth, right? What provisions do we have when people step over that line, when people break the law and steal your work, right? What do authors, what's their recourse when they have that happen and they realize? Because sometimes you don't even realize, sometimes you find out later, or somebody comes and tell you, girl, I see your work. I didn't know you were sharing your stuff. And you're like, wait, I never shared my stuff. And that's when you realize. So tell us what, if, for example, a call to the IPO office to ask about that, and what would your response be to such an author?
Sure. So the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office, we are not an enforcement body. However, we do provide information regarding copyright, and it's freely available on our website. And I completely understand what you're talking about. There are remedies for infringement under the Copyright Act of Trinidad and Tobago, and they range from things like civil remedies, such as injunctions to refrain persons from continuing to do the act which is infringing on that of the right holder. Now, the best thing and the most advisable thing to do is to always get consent from the owner of a work, because you don't want to be inadvertently infringing anyone's rights. During the pandemic, this question actually came to the forefront a lot with regard to the uploading of works, for example, on virtual platforms. In response to this, the Trinidad and Tobago Intellectual Property Office provided guidance on our website regarding the use of such works. Again, the essence of the advice and the recommendation is to always seek consent and permission from owners of works. In accordance with the Copyright Act, Section 8, only the owners of works have the exclusive rights to do, authorize, and prohibit certain acts in relation to those works. And these acts could include the uploading of works onto virtual platforms. They include communication to the public, how their works are disseminated, adaptation of works, and reproduction distribution, as I would have alluded to during my presentation. Another instance where we see the line being blurred, and a number of persons have come to the office with this next scenario I'm going to describe to you, where they are authors of works or books. They are at the stage where they are ready to publish their works, and then they tell us, well, we use images from this author, from this other publication. Can you tell us what to do? Because we want to go ahead and publish. The first thing we always tell persons to do is to verify, identify, and get permission from the owner of that source of work that you want to use. If the person is deceased, you may want to liaise with the persons representing the estate of the deceased person, just to make sure that you have permission or consent. Please, if you do not have someone's consent, please don't take the liberty to use their work, because you could end up in serious legal problems.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because what I heard there is that an author can also be a perpetrator of copyright infringement, right? When they're taking other people's work to put into their works. And if you don't seek permission, even as an author, right? Go and get permission, get verification, and if the person is deceased, go and check their family out, or whoever is the arbitrator of that estate. Ms. Alushu made the distinction of ownership and creator, right? And I think that's something we need to touch on probably another time, because we're out of time right now. But the issue of who has created the work versus who owns the work is something, it is not always, those two things don't always rest in the same person. Just quickly,
Sure.
you deal with those issues? Ownership versus who created it?
So by Section 26 of the Copyright Act, ownership of the work vests in the creator of the work. That is the general principle. However, there are cases where, for example, the course of, or let's say you contributed to the publication of a manual, but it was done during the course of the employment, the ownership would vest with the employer.
Okay.
It's not something that is always clear-cut and dry.
So the more investigation would have to be done in each case, and each case would be unique.
Yeah, but that's the general principle of the Copyright Act.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lyrinda. Yeah, I have one question again, and this is going to Ms. Katie Webb, and this is our final and last question for the session before they turn off the lights on me, right, and put me out, right? I have a question for Miss Katie. Katie, when we met at that meeting, and which is the quarterly Latin American Caribbean network meeting for the IAF, so much information came out in terms of how authors can get their due rights and compensation. And part of that work that you all do at the IAF is international representation at WIPO and at UNESCO, as you mentioned. How important is it that authors have a seat at those tables, those international tables, to be able to have their say? How important is it, Katie, from your perspective?
Well, from our perspective, it's very important, because it's from those places that it might not seem relevant to individual authors in different countries who, of course, are fighting their own battles. But what the work that happens at those international levels filters down and informs everything that happens at national levels. So it's really vital. Sorry, the baby's saying
No
hello.
apologies needed. You're a mom. We understand, fully understand. And what you pointed out there is so pivotal to how we are rolling out our national policies. Because as you rightly said, international policies sometimes feed down. We have both ways. It goes both ways, right? Sometimes the national policies feeding to regional, feeding to international, but sometimes it comes down the other way, right? Coming down from the international when UNESCO and WIPO meet, and WIPO is one of those arms of UNESCO to deal with copyright, but on the worldwide platform. So I want to thank you for that. Again, this is pages and protection. We're dealing with copyrights, contracts and compensations for authors in an AI world. This is a partnership between Book Club Corner, TT, the Tobago Library Services, and the Tobago Writers Guild in commemoration of Caribbean Literature Day, which was just the other day, July the 12th. And we want to thank you, the viewers, for being here with us. And more importantly, we want to thank the originators of the information we have shared, who are Mr. Nicholas Lusu of the Trinidad and Tobago Reprographic Rights Organization, Ms. Lyrinda Persaud of the Intellectual Property Office of Trinidad and Tobago, and Ms. Katie Webb of the International Authors Forum. They are all representing pivotal and vital organizations for us as writers, for the literary creatives, and for the orange economy, which is going to be helping the Caribbean boost our economic thrust and make sure that we are making a living, even as creatives and as writers. I want to thank all of you all for being here today. Again, if you want the presentations that were shared, apart from going back to the this session, which will be uploaded to YouTube after today, you can email us Book Club Corner TT and we'll share it with you. Please remember that this is intellectual property we're sharing with you as well, and be careful how you use it, distribute it, and if you really need to redistribute it, get permission, right? Right, guys, this has been Book Club Corner. I am Jewel Green, and I am so happy to have had this session. We'll be back next week with a local author, a local historian, Dr. Rita Pemberton, and that's our up for the discussion next week. We'll be talking to this local historian, Dr. Rita Pemberton, next week, Wednesday. Don't miss out on it at all. And remember to make sure and share these sessions with an author in your life. We want to thank you for being here. Cheers to you for sticking with us. And